morning sun crept over the horizon, spilling light across the endless rows of cotton. For most, it was a sign of another day's labor. For Isaiah, it was the beginning of another fight too. Survive in a world that never let him breathe. He had been born here on Langston plantation, his first cries swallowed by the same red soil that had soaked up generations of blood before him. Isaiah never knew freedom. His earliest memories were of chains clinking like music in the night and the sharp crack of a whip cutting through silence like thunder. He was marked from the beginning, branded not with iron but with the whispers of difference. From childhood, Isaiah carried something no one could understand. His body shook when the nights grew too quiet, his mind wandered when the overseers shouted orders, and sometimes he froze in the middle of tasks, staring off into some place only he could see. To the others, he was strange. To the overseers, he was lazy. To the master, he was broken. "Boy, you hear me?" The voice of the overseer, Mr. Hale, was like gravel ground between teeth. Hale's boot slammed against Isaiah's ribs when he didn't respond fast enough. Pain shot through him, sharp and immediate, yet Isaiah's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where the morning mist clung to the fields like ghosts. Worthless, Hale spat, kicking him again. "You best learn quick. Ain't no room for your foolishness here." Isaiah gasped for air, the sting of dirt filling his mouth. The other slaves kept their eyes lowered. No one dared to intervene. Kindness was a dangerous luxury. As a child, Isaiah had trembled in the dark whenever his mind twisted reality into something else. He would hear voices calling his name from the corners of the quarters, or see shadows move when no one stood there. His mother used to hum soft songs to calm him, rocking him gently when fear overtook him, but she was sold when he was no more than 6 years old, leaving him with nothing but the memory of her lullabies. Now there was no soothing hand, only fists. Only chains Master Langston himself took notice of Isaiah early on. He was a tall, broad man with sharp blue eyes that cut through a person like knives. Where others saw a boy in need of care, Langston saw a spectacle. "He's touched," Langston had once declared, standing over Isaiah as the boy crouched in the dirt, trembling after another fit. A weak mind and a strong body. Dangerous mix. But he'll work. They all work. From then on, Isaiah became the target of ridicule, paraded as an example of what happened when a slave forgot his place. Langston used him to instill fear in the others, and yet, even through the pain, Isaiah's spirit clung to small fragments of wonder. He would stare at the sky while picking cotton, watching the clouds drift as though they carried secrets beyond the reach of chains. He carved tiny patterns into the dirt with his fingers when no one looked, so leaving behind pieces of himself the earth might remember, but those small moments came at a cost. Every pause, every slip, every wandering glance earned him lashes. That evening, after failing to fill his sack as full as the others, Isaiah was dragged before the quarters. The whip cracked against his back, tearing skin until the ground beneath him grew slick with blood. The other slaves stood in silence, forced to watch. Master Langston's voice carried over them all. "This is what becomes of the useless. This is what happens when a slave don't obey." Isaiah didn't scream. Not because he didn't feel the pain, he felt it deeper than bone, but because something inside him had already learned that screams only fed their laughter. Instead, he stared at the dirt, willing himself to disappear into it. When the whipping was done, Isaiah collapsed, his back aflame, his mind drifting far beyond the quarters. Sarah, an older woman with kind eyes, hardened by years of suffering, knelt beside him once the master left. She whispered so softly only he could hear, "Hold on, child. You still here? You still human?" The words were fragile, like paper and fire, but they wrapped around Isaiah's heart. For a fleeting moment, he believed them. The night air pressed heavy against his wounds as he lay on the dirt floor of the quarters. Around him, others slept in silence, too weary to dream. Isaiah stared at the rafters, hearing the faint echo of his mother's lullaby. He mouthed the words without sound, tears stinging his eyes. He was alive, shackled, beaten, humiliated, but alive. And that, in itself, was the beginning of a war no one else could see. No one else could see. The sun was merciless by mid-morning, scorching the cotton fields until the air itself shimmered. Sweat dripped into Isaiah's eyes as he bent low, pulling at the stubborn plants. His hands were raw, his sack only half full, though the day had hardly begun. Every time he tried to push himself faster, the trembling came, his arms shook, his chest tightened, and a fog pressed against his mind like a heavy hand. "Pick it up, boy." Overseer Hale's voice carried across the rows. He rode on horseback, his whip coiled in his hand like a snake waiting to strike. Isaiah flinched at the sound alone. The others worked quickly, their movements mechanical, driven by fear. But Isaiah lagged. Every fiber of his body screamed against the rhythm demanded of him. His fingers fumbled, his breathing uneven. He paused for a moment, his gaze caught by the sky overhead, blue, endless. A world that seemed to exist far beyond his suffering. The pause was enough. A shadow fell over him. And then came the sting. Hale's whip slashed across his back. Isaiah collapsed forward, biting into the dirt. "Lazy bastard," Hale growled. "Think you got time to stare at the heavens? You'll get your fill of heaven when you're dead." The lash came again, fire streaking across Isaiah's shoulder. He didn't cry out, only clenched his teeth so hard he thought they might crack. The others kept working, eyes fixed to the ground. To stop, even to show pity, was to invite the whip themselves. Hours dragged on, each one stretching into eternity. Isaiah stumbled often, his sack never as heavy as the others. The overseer took delight in calling him names: broken stock, mad dog, useless boy. Each word dug deeper than the lashes. It wasn't just his body they sought to break, but his very sense of self. When the sun began to dip low, slaves trudged back toward the quarters. Isaiah lagged at the rear, his body aching, his mind clouded with confusion and shame. That night, as he sat in the corner nursing his wounds, Sarah came to him again. Her face was worn, lined with years of hardship, yet her eyes still held warmth. "You can't let him steal your soul, Isaiah," she whispered. She pressed a scrap of cloth to his bleeding back, her hands gentle despite the brutality surrounding them. "Your body might belong to them, but your spirit don't." Isaiah stared at her, words caught in his throat. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to something more than pain. But the voices in his head had grown louder lately, murmurs in the dark, whispers that mocked him when no one else was near. He wondered if he was cursed, if perhaps the master was right. Sarah seemed to sense his turmoil. She began humming a low tune, an old song that the elders had carried across oceans. The melody wrapped around Isaiah like a fragile shield, reminding him of nights when his mother sang him to sleep. For a brief moment, the voices quieted, weight lifted, but peace never lasted. The next day brought the same cycle work, pain, humiliation. Hale singled him out again, dragging him in front of the others when his sack came up light. "You see this?" Hale barked, holding Isaiah by the collar like an animal. "This here is what happens when you let weakness fester. Ain't no room for it. You either work or you suffer." He shoved Isaiah to the ground, dust rising around him as the other slaves turned their faces away. Shame burned hotter than the lash. Isaiah's chest heaved, his heart pounding, but his voice would not come. Inside he screamed, but outside he remained silent. That night, Sarah found him again, sitting alone by the edge of the quarters. The moon cast pale light across his weary face. "You've got more strength than you think," she told him softly. "Don't matter what they call you. Don't matter what they see. You keep breathing, child. That's your defiance." Isaiah listened, but the words felt far away. His body was here, chained to this land, but his mind drifted into shadows. He scratched shapes into the dirt beside him, circles, lines, meaningless patterns that only he could understand. It was his way of holding on to himself, leaving behind proof that he existed. The whispers in his head stirred again, cruel and insistent, but he fought them, clinging to Sarah's words. "Keep breathin'. You still human?" The cotton fields loomed in the distance, endless rows waiting for tomorrow's toil. But Isaiah's gaze lifted to the stars above, where no whip could reach, no chain could bind. For a fleeting second, he allowed himself to wonder if freedom might exist not in this life, perhaps, but somewhere beyond. And that fragile hope, fragile as it was, became his anchor in the storm. Asterisk, the big house loomed like a monument of power over the fields, its white columns gleaming in the morning light. For the slaves, it was a place of dread, not luxury. Isaiah had learned long ago that being summoned there rarely meant food or rest, it meant humiliation. That day, Olivercier Hale grabbed him by the arm after the field bell rang and dragged him toward the house. Isaiah's body resisted, trembling as if his bones themselves knew what awaited. "Master wants you," Hale sneered. "Best you give him a good show, boy." Inside the parlor, Master Langston reclined in a grand chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes lit up when he saw Isaiah, not with kindness, but with a predator's amusement. Several of Langston's guests, wealthy planters from neighboring estates, lounged nearby, their laughter echoing like blades scraping against stone. "Here he is," Langston announced, motioning Isaiah forward as though presenting a prize animal. "The broken one. Can't keep his mind straight. Watch this." Isaiah stood frozen, his bare feet sinking into the polished floor. His chest tightened, and the murmurs in his head began again, cruel voices hissing that he was worthless. Langston snapped his fingers. "Sing, boy." Isaiah hesitated. He didn't know songs meant for amusement, only the sorrowful hymns whispered at night. His lips trembled, no sound coming out. The whip cracked across his back, wielded not by Hale this time, but by Langston himself. The guests laughed, clapping as if it were theater. "See? Even his tongue don't work right," Langston jeered. "A mad dog in a man's skin." Isaiah swayed, his vision swimming. He felt like a puppet with broken strings, forced to perform for the amusement of men who saw him as less than human. The humiliation deepened. Langston ordered him to crawl on all fours across the parlor floor. When Isaiah hesitated, Hale kicked him down. The room erupted with laughter as Isaiah's knees scraped the wood. His head bowed low. Every movement was a strike against his dignity, each command stripping away another layer of his humanity. Yet somewhere in the depths of his suffering, a spark of defiance burned. He refused to cry out. He refused to give them the satisfaction of tears. "Useless thing," Langston muttered, finally waving him away. "Take him back. Let the others see what happens to weak minds. Fear keeps them strong." Hale dragged Isaiah out, his body aching, his soul shredded by shame. Back at the quarters, silence greeted him. The other slaves had seen enough times to know what it meant. Their eyes carried pity, but also fear they couldn't risk being associated with him. Later that night, Sarah crept to his side, her touch light against his bruised skin. "They try to break you because they fear. What they don't understand," she whispered. "Don't let them own your mind." But Isaiah wasn't sure he still had a mind to own. His thoughts tangled like knots, voices rising louder in the dark. Sometimes he couldn't tell if the whip still lashed his back, or if it was only memory playing tricks. And yet, when Sarah hummed softly, her song wrapping around the quarters like a blanket, the voices dimmed. For those few moments, Isaiah could breathe. Still, the scars of the master's game clung to him. The laughter of white men echoed in his skull, louder than any whip. He wondered if perhaps this was the true cruelty of slavery, not just the chains on his body, but the constant war on his spirit, a war that left no escape even in silence. Nightfall brought no rest. For most of the quarters, the exhaustion of endless labor forced sleep quickly. But for Isaiah, the dark was an enemy. He lay on the dirt floor, his body aching from the master's cruelty, his mind restless. Shadows stretched across the walls like living things, curling, whispering. He heard them even when no one spoke, voices calling his name. Cruel echoes repeating the overseer's insults, the master's laughter broken. Useless. Mad. Isaiah pressed his hands over his ears, but the voices came from within. His breath quickened until his chest rattled. He bit into his sleeve to keep from crying out, knowing Hale prowled at night, waiting for excuses to punish. When sleep finally came, it dragged him into nightmares. He dreamed of chains wrapping around his body tighter and tighter until he couldn't breathe. He saw his mother's face, her eyes wide as she was dragged away to be sold only. This time, she blamed him. "You cursed, Isaiah. You brought this on us." He woke drenched in sweat, the taste of dirt in his mouth from biting the floor to silence his screams. The next morning, Isaiah stumbled into the fields, his body weaker than before. The other slaves avoided his eyes. He saw their fear that madness was contagious. The kindness toward him might bring punishment. Sarah was the only one who dared. As she picked cotton beside him, she whispered, "You still here? Don't let the voices steal you, child." Isaiah wanted to believe her. But when his hand shook so violently he dropped the cotton, hail swooped down. "Worthless again," the overseer snarled. He dragged Isaiah into the open where all could see. "This one here thinks he's too good to work. Thinks he can scare the rest of you with his fool fits." Hale's whip slashed across Isaiah's back. The others flinched, but none moved. Isaiah's body convulsed. Not just from pain, but from the storm inside. His mind splitting, his vision blurring. The voices screaming louder than Hale's curses. When the overseer finally left him crumpled in the dirt, Isaiah didn't rise right away. He stared at the soil, tracing shapes with trembling fingers. Circles, lines, a language only he understood. It was the only way he knew to release what clawed at him inside. That night, Sarah found him scratching more marks into the earth outside the quarters. "What you doing, boy?" she asked softly. Isaiah looked up, his eyes hollow. "Making myself so I don't disappear." Sarah crouched beside him, her hand resting on his arm. "You ain't disappeared. Not while you still breath in." Her words carried weight, but they couldn't silence the torment. Later that night, Isaiah curled against the wall, whispering his mother's lullaby to himself, though his voice cracked. The screams inside him never stopped. They were silent to others, but to Isaiah, they were endless, tearing him apart in ways no whip ever could. The torment became his constant companion, as real as the chains that bound his wrists, as suffocating as the field dust in his lungs. His suffering went unseen, misnamed and mocked, and still endured. Isaiah sat by the edge of the quarters one evening, the air thick with the scent of sweat and smoke from the master's house. The others whispered softly inside, too tired to do more than breathe. But Isaiah's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon where the last light of day bled into the sky. Something in the colors pulled at him. A memory buried deep. He was 6 again, small enough to fit into his mother's lap. She smelled of earth and salt, her arms strong yet trembling as she held him tight. She had the same way of humming Sarah did, soft and low, carrying a rhythm older than either of them could name. He remembered pressing his face into her dress. The world safe as long as her song filled the air, and then he remembered the day they came. The trader's cart rattled up the dirt path, chains clinking. His mother clutched him to her chest, whispering, "Don't let go." Isaiah, but rough hands tore him away, his small fists clawing for her as she screamed his name. He remembered her face disappearing into the blur of dust and hooves. That was the last he saw of her. The memory hit him like a lash. Isaiah curled his knees against his chest, trembling. He wondered if his mother's strangeness had been like his. She, too, had moments where she drifted, staring into the distance as if her spirit wandered elsewhere. Some of the elders whispered she was touched. Maybe that was why she was sold too weak in their eyes, too broken. Now he feared he carried her curse. The next day in the fields, Sarah noticed his distant stare. "What's on your mind, child?" she asked gently, her hands never stopping their work. "My mama," Isaiah muttered, his throat raw from the words. She weren't right sometimes. Like me." Sarah's movement slowed. She glanced at him with eyes heavy with sorrow. "Ain't nothing wrong with you, but the world you born into. Don't let them make you believe otherwise." But Isaiah couldn't shake the thought. Was his illness his mother's gift or her burden passed down? And if so, what did that mean for him? That evening, when his sack came up light again, Master Langston himself rode down to the fields. His cold eyes swept over Isaiah as though appraising livestock. "This one ain't worth the feed I give him." Langston sneered. "Might fetch something at auction, even if he's damaged." The word struck Isaiah harder than any whip. Sold. Ripped away from the only faces that half recognized him. From Sarah's rare kindness. To be thrown into another place, alone again, Alan felt like being torn from his mother all over. Sarah saw his terror. Later, as they sat in the dim quarters, she whispered, "Don't you fear what ain't happened yet? You keep your head strong. They can sell your body, Isaiah, but they can't sell your soul." Her words wrapped around him like armor, fragile but real. And that night, when the voices rose inside his head, when his body shook so hard he thought it might break apart, he clung to her memory and his mother's song. Between the fragments of family one lost, one found Isaiah discovered the faintest thread of strength. A thread thin as a hair, but enough to keep him breathing. Enough to keep him here? The summer sun hung heavy, baking the cotton fields until the earth cracked. Isaiah moved slowly, his body a patchwork of scars, his sack never filling as fast as the others. Each stumble brought Hale's whip across his back, each pause a boot to his ribs. But it wasn't just his body faltering. Now his mind slipped further with every passing day. Sometimes, as he bent low among the plants, he thought he heard his mother's voice floating above the rows. "Isaiah, hold on, child." He would stop, breath caught in his chest, eyes wide as he searched the fields. Of course, there was no one there. Only Hale's roar and the crack of the lash to drag him back. At night, the torment grew sharper. In the suffocating dark of the quarters, Isaiah's thoughts twisted until he couldn't tell what was real. Chains rattled when no one moved. Shadows stretched into human forms. The cries of whipped slaves echoed in his ears long after silence fell. Once, Sarah shook him awake after he began thrashing in his sleep. His skin was drenched in sweat, his voice hoarse from shouting. "You fightin' ghosts again, child?" she whispered, wiping his forehead with her rough hand. Isaiah's chest heaved. "They don't leave me. I hear 'im. I see 'em." Sarah's eyes filled with pity, but also with fear. She stroked his arm gently, murmuring, "Ain't no curse, Isaiah. Just pain. Pain too heavy for one soul to carry." But her words couldn't anchor him for long. The master had noticed his worsening state. Rather than pity, Langston saw opportunity. One evening, he ordered Isaiah dragged to the whipping post in front of the gathered slaves. "This here is what weakness breeds," Langston declared, his voice sharp as a blade. "A slave who don't know the difference between truth and madness. Let him be your warning." The lash tore across Isaiah's back again and again until blood soaked the dirt beneath him. He didn't cry out. His silence unnerved even the others, their eyes wide as they watched. Inside, though, Isaiah's mind shattered further. With each strike, he heard his mother's screams, saw her being dragged away. He smelled smoke that wasn't there, felt chains tightening around his neck, though none touched him. When Langston finally stopped, Isaiah collapsed, half-conscious. But in the haze of pain, he swore he saw his mother kneeling beside him, her hand brushing his face. He whispered her name, though no sound left his lips. From then on, Isaiah became more ghost than man. The slaves kept their distance, afraid of the strange look in his eyes. Some whispered he was cursed, others that he was already half dead. Even Sarah struggled to reach him, though she never gave up. "You still here?" she told him one night, gripping his shoulders firmly. "You still breathin'? Don't you let them steal the last of you." But Isaiah no longer knew where here was. His body remained in the quarters, in the fields, at the master's mercy, but his mind wandered, chained to memories, visions, and screams that never ceased. In that way, he lived in two prisons, the iron one built by men, and the invisible one built by his own suffering. Both were mislabeled yet, in enduring them. He became something Langston could not name, something the overseers could not lash away. A man still breathing, still surviving even as his world tried to erase him. Harvest season came, and with it, a demand for speed, precision, and endurance beyond human limits. From sunrise to well after dusk, the slaves bent low in the fields, their fingers raw, their backs screaming. Overseer Hale's whip never rested, striking at any who faltered. For Isaiah, every step was agony. His body scarred, frail, trembling lagged behind the others. His sack never filled as quickly, his movements jerky and uncertain. His mind, already splintered, betrayed him again and again. That day, as the sun blazed high, Isaiah froze mid-motion. His hands hovered above the cotton plant, unable to move. His chest tightened and the voices roared inside his skull. He heard chains clinking, his mother's screams, Sarah's lullabies all at once. The field spun. "Move, boy." Hale's shout cracked the air. Isaiah remained frozen, eyes wide, sweat streaming down his face. The overseer dismounted his horse, rage burning in his eyes. He dragged Isaiah by the collar into the open space between the rows. "Worthless dog. You don't work. You don't live." Hale's whip cracked, slicing Isaiah's skin open. He flinched, but did not scream. The other slaves watched with lowered eyes, torn between pity and fear. Sarah's lips moved in silent prayer. Master Langston arrived soon after. Riding down from the house with his polished boots and cruel smile, he looked at Isaiah, bleeding and trembling, and shook his head. "I told you," Langston said loudly so all could hear. "Madness don't belong in the field, but a lesson must be made." He ordered Isaiah tied to the whipping post. The slaves were forced to gather, their weary eyes fixed on the scene. Isaiah's wrists were bound, his body stretched tight. The whip sang through the air, striking again and again. Flesh split, blood ran, dust darkened with red. Isaiah swayed with each blow, his vision flashing white, his breath shallow. The voices in his head screamed louder, till they blended with the crowd's silence. Langston leaned forward, his voice cold. "This is what happens when weakness is tolerated. Let it burn into your memory." But something unexpected happened. When the lash fell again, Isaiah lifted his head. His eyes, clouded yet burning with something unshakable, met Langston's. He did not beg. He did not cry. He simply stared, silent, defiant. The slaves watching felt it. The overseer hesitated for the briefest second. Even Langston's smug smile faltered. There was no victory in Isaiah's suffering. No submission. Blow after blow fell, yet Isaiah's silence remained. His body broke, but his spirit refused. And in that quiet defiance, he became something more than the master's property, more than a warning. He became a mirror of their cruelty, a living testament to a resilience they could not understand. At last, when Isaiah's body could no longer stand, he collapsed, chains clinking as he fell limp. Langston waved dismissively. "Take him away. He's finished." But the image lingered in every heart that saw Isaiah standing beaten yet unbroken, his silence echoing louder than screams. Sarah knelt beside him when they dragged him back to the quarters. She cradled his head, whispering, "You still here, child? You still here?" But Isaiah's breaths were shallow, his body battered beyond repair. His eyes flickered toward the sky, where the first stars pierced the dusk. His lips moved faintly, forming words only Sarah could hear. "Free." Now, the night was thick with silence. The quarters smelled of sweat, blood, and sorrow as Isaiah lay stretched on a pallet of straw. Sarah stayed close, dabbing his wounds with rags soaked in cool water. Each breath he took was shallow, rattling like dry leaves caught in the wind. Around him the other slaves sat quietly. Some pretended to sleep, but their eyes betrayed them. They were watching, waiting. They all knew this was Isaiah's final night. Sarah held his hand, whispering softly, "Don't you leave us in silence, child. Let the Lord carry you gentle." Isaiah's lips trembled. His voice was broken, but the words came through like shards of glass. "All these years, they said I was cursed, sick in the head, but it was them, their chains, their whip, that sickness." His eyes clouded with tears. "It ain't mine. It's theirs." The room grew heavy with his words. No one dared move, He coughed violently, blood spotting his chin. Sarah wiped it away, humming the lullaby his mother once sang. For a moment, his face softened, as though the sound carried him back to the warmth of her arms. Isaiah whispered, "Mama, I hear you." His eyes fixed on something no one else could see, and his chest slowly rose, then fell. When his last breath slipped away, Sarah bowed her head, tears spilling freely. "He free now," she murmured, her voice trembling but firm. "Ain't no master own him no more." The others sat in silence, their hearts heavy but stirred by something deeper. Isaiah's suffering, his silence in the face of cruelty, his refusal to break it burned in their memories. He had lived and died under chains, but his spirit had left behind a mark they could not erase. The next morning, Langston ordered Isaiah's body buried in an unmarked grave beyond the fields. He thought it would erase the shame of the night before, the unsettling silence that had shaken even his authority. But the slaves remembered. At dusk, after the fields had emptied, Sarah and a few others walked quietly to the grave. They pressed their hands to the soil, whispering prayers not just for Isaiah, but for themselves, for strength to endure, for the hope of freedom yet unseen. And though Isaiah's body was gone, his presence lingered in their hearts. His silence became their song, his defiance, their secret fire, his story misunderstood, misdiagnosed. Dismissed as madness became a truth they carried forward, that even in the deepest chains, a spirit could resist. Long after the seasons passed, whispers of Isaiah lived on among the slaves. Mothers told their children about the man who suffered, who heard voices, who stared down the master with unbroken eyes. They said his soul walked with them in the fields, a shadow at their side, reminding them that freedom was not just a dream but a right. In the end, Isaiah's madness was not weakness. It was his mind's last defense against the world's cruelty, a shield, cracked and fragile, but unyielding. His story became an echo, carried on the wind. Defying the silence forced upon them, Isaiah had left this earth broken but not defeated. And in that truth, the others found a piece of freedom no whip, no master, no chain could ever take away. No chain could ever take away.